Welcome back to the Community Action Partnership podcast. My name is Jamie, and with me today is Gail and Jesse. Today we're going to be having a conversation about language and voices. Now, when I say language and voices, I'm kind of talking about how we talk to each other and the tone that we're using and even body language that we use. And I know there's language registers that you're going to go over, but I do want to start off by letting everyone know that I think it's important to know that there is not a right or a wrong language register or voice to us, but really it's the situation and how appropriate it is to use it. So
Right.
can you...
I think culture has a lot to do with it also.
Okay.
You know, because some body languages in some cultures would be acceptable, where in other places it won't. So culture is a big thing to take into consideration when you're speaking about communication. So yeah,
I think that's right on.
yeah.
Can you go in and tell us, there's 5 language registers. You want to go ahead and tell us a little bit about those?
Sure. One of them, the very first one, is Frozen, and it is always the same. It is usually the Pledge of Allegiance, the Lord's Prayer. And Jesse, you have a really good one that is always Frozen. What is your
There's
example?
another one that I tend to think about pretty often when I think about frozen language, because frozen language it's basically that you're saying the same thing. There's just structure to it, and it's always the same.
Never changes.
And it never changes. And one of those things is the Miranda rights.
Yes.
So for those of you who have experienced that will know that the Miranda rights are always the same.
It's always Frozen, same words every time. So great examples. The next one is formal, and that's your standard voices usually used in most of your conversations, such as when you do a presentation. Like I would say this is formal right now. We're doing a presentation with speakers, or your choice of words is not memorized. It comes out different.
Yeah, so formal is going to have a structured, so when you're talking, it's a structured sentence.
Right.
So there's not going to be like short words and stuff. It's going to be a full sentence and the sentence syntax. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So everything is said correctly, proper grammar, punctuation, and things like that.
Where would you typically see formal language used?
So formal is typically going to be used a lot in the workplace. Now, obviously, every workplace is different. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit about the differences in workplaces. But in a lot of workplaces, they do expect that the language is going to be formal. As well as in schools, they use formal language register as well.
Or if somebody's speaking from a pulpit or something, they're going to use complete sentences.
Sure.
The syntax will be complete. So yeah.
Absolutely.
So the next one is more the consulative, and that is the formal registered used in a conversation. Okay, so maybe not every sentence will be complete, or a hairdresser, when she's describing what she's going to be doing today, it's not complete sentence. It's just a description kind of thing. So that's more consultative. Jamie?
One of the things I think about is kind of if you go to like an attorney and you're having the consultation, you're really trying to get that information out. And so you're trying to draw some points out so you can get the information that you need.
Right. And then my favorite, the casual language, which is what you characterize when you're talking with your friends or our family members. It's a little
People that you're close with.
you're close with, and you don't have to have a complete thought. You can change each other's sentences, and this is the one you find in your families and friends.
And typically there's kind of a smaller vocabulary
Right.
that's used in there. It's not going to be used in your workplace, or it's where you're comfortable and can be casual.
And again, this is a great culture has a great impact on this one, on the casual.
Yeah, and also nonverbals are, when you're talking about casual language, nonverbals are very important as well, because they are used as conversation, basically.
Right.
When you're casually chatting with somebody, you may use your hands, or like, even if you're like if you're like having a casual conversation with someone and you see one of your friends and you're just like, sup,
What's
you
up?
know?
Yeah.
So that's just like, that's okay. You know what I mean? That's casual register.
See, in a formal register, I wouldn't be able to talk with my hands. I would have to be conscious of this. In my casual, I complete my train of thought. And it also helps individuals that have a shorter vocabulary. That's how they express themselves is with their body language and their hands. It's great. It's mine. I own it.
Is that where you're comfortable at, Gail?
Absolutely. Yeah. Drive people nuts. Yep. And then the next one is intimate. And now, first thing that comes to mind would be between the language between lovers. But that can be friends. It can be coworkers you finish each other's sentences. You've worked a long time together, so you know what each other's thinking. And that's an intimate language that's out there.
Yes.
I do want to point out, though, that intimate can also be a negative thing, like sexual harassment and things like that,
Right.
where, it's not appropriate for that situation. And so that then, 4-letter words or acronyms for, businesses like Community Action Partnership, we say CAP. That's intimate within us as an agency. And so other agencies might not know that, or other people might not know that. So that's going to be along that intimate line.
And that's one of the really good things about being aware of your communication, where you're at, and what kind of register. And that's why it's so important to know that. Now, another place is you can have, like Jamie said at first, there's nothing wrong with any one of these. It's where you're at, who you're at, what story or what point you're trying to come across. And Jesse has a couple examples where they can be either appropriate or inappropriate. You have the one about the court and then the one about the workers. So
Well, the thing
go
is
ahead.
about registers of language, like you're saying, none of them are right or wrong, and there's appropriate situations for all of them,
Right.
And the important thing is learning what the registers of language are and being able to navigate yourself through each register depending on what the circumstances or situation or environment opens up your possibilities for all kinds of things, especially when you're talking about, like you talked about culture earlier. Language is a big part of culture, and a lot of places, especially like works and things like that, they may hire people just because they fit their culture, even though they don't have the skills to work there, right? And so if you're able to go into an interview and you have the language skills to determine what the registers of language are of the interview and what is expected, and you were able to match that, then you gain like a connection with the person that you're talking to, right? And you get a better opportunity to maybe get that job or maybe get into that group and things like that, right? So when we talk about, and if I'll talk about work for one. So like at Community Action Partnership, there is an expected register of language, which is formal in some areas, casual in others, and also depends on who we're talking to, right?
Right.
So if we are talking to, let's say, our director, it is more than likely expected it to be formal register, right? So we're going to go in there. We're going to use formal register when we're talking to her because it's also a way that we show respect, right? We respect your authority over us, and so we can use formal register. However, if we're talking to, let's say, a community member that comes in, who obviously lives in casual register most of the time, we want them to feel welcome and to feel like we're not judging them and that we're from their level too.
Right.
That we're not sitting up here, because it can turn people off, right? So if you live in a casual register, that's how you talk, that's how you communicate, and that's the majority of your time is spent in that, and you don't really switch to any other registers. And then you go into a place and all of a sudden they're speaking to you in a formal register.
Maybe using a larger vocabulary,
that you're
understand.
not used to. You may get uneasy, uncomfortable. You may even get offended and
Felt
think,
judged.
this person thinks they're better than me because they're trying to speak higher than me. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the reasons why we want to understand what the registers of language are, understand what's the appropriate situation to be in, which register you're in, because you want to take away judgment, when you're speaking and communicating. And then also building relationships. Obviously, we're really big on building relationships. It's a way you build relationships is how you communicate with people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like at our work, we have multiple different registers of language that we use, whether we're talking to our boss or we're talking to a community member, and also within our departments.
Right.
In our office.
Right.
You go to one side of our office, it's a very formal register. However, you go back into another section of our office and it's extremely casual and borderline intimate language.
Yeah.
And so you cannot cross them though. You have to understand which register is appropriate and which one isn't. Because if you do, you may end up in HR's office. Right?
That's true.
Don't want to go
or
there.
You could end up with a harassment charge.
Yep.
Right? Just by simply taking the register that you were using in one area and using it in another area. Right?
And on the flip side of that, Jesse, two things can happen. We need to be aware when our community members come in that they're not, when they're talking with their hands and their voice is a little excited or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean they're aggressive or there's something wrong with them. That's their form of communication. And to accept them that way and to reach them that way just welcomes them. And then again, you spoke about an interview. I can remember I have a bachelor's degree, so I'm going to say I'm fairly intelligent, but when I'm nervous, guess what happens? I can go into an interview and be casual and rattle about things like, I'm sure the guy's sitting there going TMI, okay? Because I want to make sure. And so to be aware of that is very important. There's a couple jobs, when I was interviewing, when I didn't get a job, I would call back and say, okay, could you tell me why I wasn't the choice? And every time it was, I was too casual because of my nervousness, or that's just my personality. So to be aware of that going into an interview is like very important.
So I think it's important because what I'm hearing you guys say is could be some consequences that come from not using the appropriate register at the appropriate time. And so I think that's why I think this is so important, because there can be consequences. I know, Jesse, I've heard you talk about consequences and language that you have used in the courthouse.
Yeah, I mean, I've had a few instances where I've had some consequences by the way I've spoke, not only at work. I had a job where I almost got fired because the way I was speaking to the boss, you know what I mean? But I also had an instant when I was in court and I was very young. I was a teenager. I was not familiar with, I was familiar with how courts are ran and things like that. But when I went into the courthouse, courthouses are very frozen and formal, right? So there's frozen sections of communication that have to be said in court, and they're said the exact same way because there's, it's just the way it works. It's the way the law is, right? It has to be done a certain way. And then questions and answers are said in a formal way, full sentence structure,
full sentence.
Appropriate, and that's how I expected the conversation to go. And so one of the things about language registers is if you are within a language register, like say you're informal, it's inappropriate to drop down
more than two registers.
Right? So it would be inappropriate if your conversation was strictly informal and we were having a formal conversation, and that's where the register stayed. And then all of a sudden it dropped down into intimate. That's when you run into those harassment problems and things like that, because it's like, whoa, what just happened here, right? So when I went to court, I expected to be informal, right? Or frozen. And that's how it started. However, the judge, he's a judge, so they get away with things, decided to drop down into a casual register, and started joking about how young I looked, and I was extremely offended by it, because It's like, who are you to talk to me? You don't even know me. You know what I mean? And so I got upset and I dropped down into intimate language
Uh-oh.
and dropped some bombs in court. And I learned my lesson really quick because even though he was able to do it, I had consequences for me doing it, right?
Yeah.
And I ended up getting charged with contempt of court and went to jail for it. And so I learned at a very young age the importance of when you can use certain registers of language and when you can't. Now, I think most people would probably say, yes, we all know you're not supposed to swear in court, but these are the things that happen. The judge decided to change the register of language without knowing me, without it, and it wasn't appropriate for him to do that. He shouldn't have done that,
Right.
And so that is the thing. I was offended. I was upset by what he said because you don't know me like that, right? And so this is the same way for other areas of life, work, school, relationships, just your natural conversations at the
Yep.
store with the
Yep.
grocer, just in all situations. The safe bet, I would say, is if you understand and have the knowledge of formal register, if you're educated in formal register, to use formal register until you know otherwise.
Right.
Because if you're using formal register, at least, you're using complete sentences and you're less likely to offend somebody.
And it's more respectful.
It is more respectful.
In most cases.
Now, if you're using, like I said before, though, if you're using formal register and you're obviously talking to somebody who's
in a casual.
in a casual,
Yeah.
then you would drop down and go into casual with them,
Mhm.
And then you're only dropping down one register, and that would be acceptable.
That would be acceptable, yes.
So and Jamie, you mentioned another one, not just the 5 registers, but it also tone is very important.
Yeah, we talked about voices. And so
Voices, yeah.
when I say voices, I mean the tone that you're using and how
Right.
you're speaking.
So-
And so there's 3 different voices that we talk about. One is the child voice, one is the parent voice, and then the third one is the adult voice.
The child voice is probably the one that is the hardest for me to receive from an adult. Okay, it's they're victimized, they're picking on, and I can't do this, and I'm emotional and whining. No, use your adult voice and just tell me what's going on. It's very common. And it's not, I mean, we're using children, but children, yeah, it's totally acceptable. Even with my children, I say, use your big girl voice or whatever. But the whiny is not a positive in any, when you go into a business or you need something, it's just not received as well as it should be. I try really hard to work with it, but the whiny, the child voice is hard.
Yeah, it's just a defensive,
I know the victim.
Victimized.
It's not my fault. It's everybody else's fault. It also comes with like when you're using that voice, you take on that stuff too. Like whatever you're talking, what you're saying through your voice and stuff,
It's feeding your
you're
emotions.
internally
Yeah.
taking it in.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So then it becomes like you become what you're saying, right? And it's a losing attitude voice, right?
Right.
Is like no matter what's going on, the world is out to get you, and
Everybody's
you're a
picking on me.
victim,
They
Now it
may-
doesn't have to always come out like whiny and like I'm a victim, like just in the way that you talk and like
And you really can affect your emotional intelligence with that. Like, I am a victim. I am.
absolutely.
Everybody hates me, and that voice. I love what you said
Absolutely.
about what we say is what we start thinking and doing, and you can get that attitude in a really bad place really fast.
The more you talk about something, the more you believe it, and the more you feel it, right?
Right.
And so, yeah.
What about the parent voice?
Well,
Oh,
the thing about the parent voice, though, that's interesting is if for me, if somebody is using a child voice and like a whiny child voice, I find it very easy to go into parent voice.
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So what is parent voice? They're kind of like that authority or boss and kind of
It's
demanding.
it's
Right.
And so
it's a directive.
if my child is acting, inappropriately and using that child voice, I want to instantly go into that, no, you need to stop it right now,
Yeah.
kind of demanding they change.
Or if like somebody is in like feeling sorry for themselves into a victim mode, it's really easy to be like, get over it. You know what I mean? Like, life's not fair. Get over it.
Yeah,
Quit feeling sorry for yourself.
yeah, it is not fair.
Buckle up your bootstraps and,
Walk on.
do all the
Yep.
famous sayings
Yeah.
that there is, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And that parent voice can come out with just one word, like with the child, say stop, but it's also the body language that's going along with that parent voice.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a doubt that it's a
Yeah,
directive.
nonverbals play a big part in the voices. So
Yeah.
it's not just what you're saying, but also your body language as well. right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Then we have the adult voice. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
Well, hopefully that's what we use most of the time. Okay. That's the patient, understanding, free of negative, free of judgment
Right.
in our conversations. Is
I
more
really
than-
think it's the win-win place to be.
Yeah.
It's really has respect between everybody, and there's conversation and feedback able to
Right.
be able to go back and forth. And so I know for me that's where I've been most successful, but again, you're not always in there.
Well, your circumstances can dictate that, but if you use the adult voice and you're aware of the others, then hopefully somebody can bring you back from that whatever non-negative voice you have. So,
Right.
yeah, adult voice, yeah.
I think it's important though too because that's really where you can negotiate.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
And that's what I think is important about it.
Yeah, especially like in our job at Community Action, we want to be in the adult voice. We want to be asking questions. We want to like find ways like, how can we resolve this? Okay, if you're feeling like if somebody comes in with the child voice, like we talked about, it's easy to go into parent voice, but then you end up with a
we don't have any
you
resolution.
versus me
Yeah.
situation. If you're in adult voice and you're talking to them and you're saying, okay, I hear that you're feeling this way. Okay, what can we do to change the situation? You know what I mean? And you're trying to ask questions. You're trying to do it in a non-judgmental way. And then a lot of times that can help that person get out of that child voice,
Mm-hmm.
and move into an adult voice with
Absolutely.
you. Because they feel
Absolutely.
like, okay, this is somebody who's they're trying to find a win-win situation here rather than,
And that's absolutely the voice that should be used when whatever registry you're in. Because if you think about it, if you take one of these registries and do it in a childlike or, wouldn't come across.
And I could tell you, because, we all have kids.
Yeah.
When you use an adult voice versus a parent voice with your children, there is a much different reaction to them.
Absolutely.
Like when my son does something wrong, and I'm a parent, so it's not like I'm 24/7 in adult voice. I've used the parent voice. I have a really good dad voice when I need it to come out, And so there are times when you have to kind of like put a little fear into your child because, they did something that could jeopardize their life or
Right.
something like that, right? But like I do notice a difference, like when I use a stern parent voice on my child, he will typically cry. He'll like run to another room, close the door, and then I feel really bad afterwards. You know what I mean? Whereas if I use an adult voice with him and I say, okay, buddy, what is it that you did wrong? Why is that wrong? And do you think that this consequence is appropriate for that? Or I just have a conversation with him in an adult voice. I notice that his reaction is completely different. His demeanor is completely different. You
More
know what I mean?
positive. Yeah.
And then he takes more responsibility for what he did wrong rather than
Come on the defense part.
being on
Yeah.
the defensive part.
Yeah. I think that's with any circumstance, whether you're communicating with your spouse or a friend or somebody that might have hurt your feelings, the adult voice is going to have a lot more positive results in any circumstances.
I know I'm the same way, Jesse. My kids are more likely to do what I'm asking of them if I'm using the adult voice.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you use your voices in your daily life really do affect and steer where you go.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we were
Absolutely.
talking about that a little bit ago. And I know that you have a story as well that involves voices and how the way you use your voice, just in the tone even, can affect the way your day goes,
Right.
or the way you feel inside, your emotions, your mental state.
My husband has dementia, and so we've been doing a lot of growing points, and the tone and the language hasn't really affected me in a lot of ways. Not only does he have dementia, but he's hard of hearing.
Mhm.
Okay. So we repeat things often, but we do it loud so that he can hear it. In fact, at one point, my grandkids said, "Why are you always upset with Grandpa?" Well, I'm not. He's hard of hearing. But I find, especially on the weekends when I'm there all day, all of a sudden I'm agitated. I'm less patient. I'm short. I'm going into the parental voice a little more. I'm answering his questions not as an adult, but short and sweet. And I had to analyze what's going on, because I'm really not. And he's picking up on it. Okay.
Sure.
And so he's feeling bad. And so we get in this cycle. And I realized, because my body is hearing me in a loud voice. And so it's going, okay, we're upset, we're mad, and oh my gosh, we've been mad for a long time. So I'm just going to be really kind of ugly the whole rest of the day. And so it's really something I have to be aware of. And that just shows you that we might think that we got it under control, but our voices really feed into our body language, our emotions, and how we can affect everybody. And it's been really great since I've realized that. Now, I'm like you. Sometimes it doesn't
Gonna
happen.
have those times, right?
But then we stop it. But it's really great. Things are so much better, and there's more laughter, there's more joy, because I'm made aware of, okay, that was loud, but, well, and then we cheated. We went and had his hearing aids tuned up a little bit. So, okay. So, yeah. Yeah. So that helps. But it has just made such a difference that when my family come over, they even notice the environment different. That I'm, and there's a lot to it. People don't take it as serious as they should.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say, Gail, is you've recognized that it's not only in the things that you're saying,
The words, right?
the words that you're saying, but also the tone that you're saying it in.
And the level of it. I mean,
Right.
yeah, just the level. You can say, "I love you," and you're screaming it, and you
Right.
can say, "I love you" like 4 or 5 times, and you're kind of like in a bad attitude. I mean,
Right.
and it has nothing to do with anything. So that's
Yeah,
very important.
Yeah. I mean, the way you speak plays a large part in your emotions. You know, it's part of that emotional intelligence as well, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And the big part about emotional intelligence is recognizing when that stuff is happening, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the voices that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Recognize
Recognizing
the
it.
way you're speaking, not only to people you work with, your relationships, but also the way you're speaking to yourself internally. Because we all do self-talk.
Absolutely.
Just doesn't come out verbally, but we
Absolutely.
are talking to ourselves inside. And so if we are self-talking the child voice to ourselves all the time, why am I always the victim of this, or
Nothing's
life's not
ever going to go
fair,
right.
nothing's ever going to go right, and you're telling yourself this, I'm no good,
Yeah. You
nobody
start
likes
living
me,
it.
you
Yeah.
will start to
Gotta
believe
believe
that,
it.
and that is the way you will live your life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's important. This is why we're talking about this stuff, is we want you to understand that the way you speak verbally,
Affects.
internally, affects your life.
And others. And there's another great
And
point.
others.
Yeah, and there's another great point that I just would like to stress, and that's if we recognize we're in the parent voice or we're in the child voice, and we do it to a loved one or a friend, it's okay to go to that adult voice and apologize,
Sure.
and recognizing it and acknowledging it, and that goes a long ways. That's something I've learned through these last 3 or 4 years. Walking the walk we're walking is it's okay to say, "Oops, I blew it," and yeah, it's okay, and it's great for children to hear. I'm sorry,
Yep.
I was using a voice that wasn't
I
respectful.
do that a lot, actually.
Yeah,
know what I
and
mean?
that's great
And
training.
I know
for
what
them.
it feels like as a as an adult. So as an adult feeling that, I know what it would feel like as a child.
If somebody says, "Hey, I shouldn't have been speaking that way," I mean,
Yes.
Well, you're being a great example that way of identifying something that wasn't working and then correcting it and then showing and being that example and showing how to do it in a better way. And so I
Absolutely.
think that's important too.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a great point that you made that, because when you're on the other end of that and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I really apologize for the way I said that.
I blew it.
That means a lot when somebody does that." You know what I mean?
If you're interested in learning a little bit more about this topic and would like to have community action, come along your side, reach out to us here and we'd love to help you learn some more and practice using it.
Thank you for joining us today. Community Action Partnership is a nonprofit organization. All the services we provide are free of charge to income qualifying community members. What we talked about today is just a bit of what we cover in our coaching and workshops. For more information, you can check out our website at cap4action.org. That's CAP, the number 4, action.org. You could also just give us a call at 1-800-326-4843 or come visit one of our locations. We would like to thank our sponsor, Optum Idaho, for making this series possible.